Hello and welcome to the History Quiz with me, Joshua Daniels. This is the quiz of June 2024, a series of quizzes I'm releasing on the penultimate Sunday of every month throughout the year of 2024. As you can probably tell, these quizzes all have a specialist focus on history. Now I try to cover different geographical areas, different periods of history to try and make it as accessible and challenging as possible for everyone. So, the rules. For those of you who haven't played before, number 1, no conferring. You can play as teams or on your own, and by that I mean you actually can play on your own, not against anyone if you want to test your own historical knowledge, but there is no discussing or cheating between teams and players, no sharing answers, no copying, nothing like that. It all has to be off your own steam. Number 2, no using search engines or internet to find out answers either, so don't pause the video to try and Google an answer, no secretly searching on your phones. It all has to be from up here. Number 3, 1 answer per question and 1 point per correct answer, so I won't ask you to do more than 1 answer for a question, and you only get 1 point for each correct answer. Number 4, there are 5 categories in total, 30 questions with 15 seconds to answer each one, unless there's an exception. You do not need to answer all the questions, so you won't get penalised for missing a question, but you will not get a point for questions left unanswered, so the only way to get a point will be to put a correct answer in there. Missed questions or incorrect answers will not get you a point. There's no half points or anything like that, any half measures allowed in this one. So if we're all ready to start writing down our answers, we'll move on to the first category. First category is famous faces. So I will show you 10 images and they will be of famous historical figures. All you have to do is write down the name of that famous historical figure to get the correct point, So without further ado, let's move on to the first question. So, number 1, whose face is this? Number 2, whose face is this? Number 3, whose face is this? Number 4, whose face is this? Number 5, whose face is this? Number 6, whose face is this? Number 7, whose face is this? Number 8, whose face is this? Number 9, penultimate face, whose face is this? Final face, number 10, whose face is this? And that brings an end to the first category. That was famous faces. Second category then, number 2, is events and dates. Now this category is a little bit different. So on the next slide, you will see on the left-hand side 5 events labelled 1 to 5. On the right-hand side, you will see 5 dates labelled A to E. You will get a minute to try and connect as many of those events to those dates as you can. You can write it down as the events and dates. You can write down all of them and then match them via lines. You can just write down the corresponding number to the corresponding letter, whichever you find easiest and most suitable for you. So, without further ado, your minute will start once I finished reading out the last date. Category number 2, events and dates. Number 1, dissolution of the monasteries. Number 2, Tokyo becomes capital of Japan. Number 3, start of the anarchy in England and Normandy. Number 4, the first Archbishop of Canterbury. And number 5, fall of the Berlin Wall. That was the events. The dates: A, 1868, B, 597, C, 1989, D, 1135, or E, 1536. You're about halfway through. About 10 seconds left. And that brings an end. Events and dates, category number 3. Moving on to category number 2. Moving on to the third category, true or false. So I will show you a historical statement, and you have to put down whether it is true or false. Of course, you only get the point if you write down the correct answer. 5 questions, 15 seconds to answer each question. So, question number 1. True or false? Number 1. Oliver Cromwell's last words were, "A fine king I would have been." Number 2. True or false? The first prison in England was called Gaol as it was an open labour camp and subject to strong winds, which is where the word jail comes from. Number 3. True or false? The first death in the American Civil War was accidental, and even after the first battle had finished. Number 4. True or false? Alexander the Great died by falling from a cliff looking for potential assassins after an anonymous tip. And number 5, true or false? In 1932, Australia undertook and failed a military operation against emus, nicknamed the Emu War. And that's the end of the third category. Moving on to our fourth and penultimate category, which came first. So I will give you two historical point in times. They could point in time, that could be events, it could be deaths, it could be inventions, discoveries, expeditions. All you have to do is write down which one came first. So, the first question. Which came first? The first man into space or the first woman to climb Everest? Number 2. Which came first? The death of Tutankhamun or the start of the Mayan calendar? Number 3. Which came first? The first British king to visit the USA or the death of the last French king? Number 4. Which came first? The Iron Age or the Bronze Age? And finally, number 5. Which came first? The First World War or creation of the song Cotton Eye Joe? And that concludes the fourth and penultimate category. Now we're moving on to our fifth and final category. Very simple, general history knowledge. 5 questions, all based around general history. No tricks or twists, just very straightforward history questions. So without further ado, our first question. Number 1. Valentina Tereshkova was the first woman to do what? Number 2. The Kettle War, the Dodge City War, and the Pig War all had what in common? Number 3. In what country was the piano invented in the 1700s? Number 4. Who was the first Roman emperor? Finally, number 5. Which American president served 4 terms? And that concludes the history quiz with me, Joshua Daniels, for June 2024. So let's take a second just to recollect ourselves, and when we're all ready, we'll move on to the answers. And we start with our first category, famous faces. So, face number 1 was Confucius, face number 2 was Johnny Cash, face number 3 was Frida Kahlo, face number 4 was Bobby Charlton, face number 5 was Mother Teresa, face number 6 was Sun Tzu, face number 7 was Florence Nightingale, face number 8 was King Richard III, face number 9 was Ada Lovelace, and face number 10 was Mikhail Gorbachev. Moving on to the events and dates. So number 1, dissolution of the monasteries was E 1536. So 1 was E. Number 2, Tokyo becomes capital of Japan was A 1868. So 2 was A. Number 3, start of the anarchy in England and Normandy was D 1135. So 3 was D. Number 4, first Archbishop of Canterbury was B 597. So 4 was B. And 5, fall of the Berlin Wall was C 1989. So 5 was C. So let's make sure we've got all those jotted down. And when we're all ready, we'll move on to category number 3, true or false. So, true or false? Oliver Cromwell's last words were, "A fine king I would have been." Number 1 was false. It was not, the actual words are believed to be, "It is not my design to drink or to sleep, but my design is to make what haste I can to be gone." Number 2. The first prison in England was called Gaol, as it was an open labour camp and subject to strong winds, which is where the word jail comes from. This is also false. The first one was called Millbank in 1816. Jail comes from the Latin meaning cage, and Millbank was so called because it was the site of a former mill. Number 3. The first death in the American Civil War was accidental, and even after the first battle had finished. This is true. It was Daniel Huff, the Irish American killed by cannon fire, and after a salute to the flag after the Battle of Fort Sumter. And so no one actually died in Fort Sumter until the cannon salute afterwards. And number 4, Alexander the Great died by falling from a cliff looking for potential assassins after an anonymous tip. This is false. It is potentially a small illness, could even have been poisoned. And number 5, in 1932, Australia undertook and failed a military operation against emus, nicknamed the Emu War. This is true. It was nicknamed the Emu War by the press, and actually there is also found in my research that the press gave a similar nickname to their attempted military culling of rabbits around the same period. Moving on to category number 4, which came first? So number 1, which came first, the first man into space or the first woman to climb Everest? It was the first man into space, Yuri Gagarin in 1963, and it was Junko Tabei in 1975. Number 2, the death of Tutankhamun or the start of the Mayan calendar? It was the Mayan calendar. Mayan calendar was 3114 BC, Tutankhamun was 1324 BC. Number 3, the first British king to visit the USA or the death of the last French king? It was the death of the French king. Louis XVI in 1793 versus George VI, actually surprisingly late on, in 1939. Number 4, which came first, the Iron Age or the Bronze Age? It was the Bronze Age. And number 5, the First World War or the creation of the song Cotton Eye Joe? It was actually the creation of the song Cotton Eye Joe, not the version we obviously know by Rednecks, but it is believed that the Cotton Eye Joe actually goes back into the 19th century America and could have been referring to things such as illnesses. And finally, category number 5, general history knowledge. So, number 1, Valentina Tereshkova was the first woman to do what? She was the first woman to go to space. Number 2, the Kettle War, the Dodge City War, and the Pig War all had what in common? They had the fact that no one was killed in common. I would also accept that they were bloodless wars, which is another term for wars which had no deaths. Number 3, in what country was the piano first invented in the 1700s? It was Italy. Number 4, who was the first Roman emperor? It was Augustus Caesar. And number 5, which American president served 4 terms? It was Franklin D. Roosevelt. I'll even accept FDR. So thank you everyone for playing, hope you all enjoyed. Please let me know in the comments below what your scores were. I'll accept any suggestions of what categories, areas, etc. to cover to the next one. But without further ado, I'd just like to say thanks once again for playing, and I hope to see you all next month.